we present our paper Writer-Defined AI Personas for On-Demand Feedback Generation. This work resulted from a collaboration between Karim Benharrak, Tim Zindulka, Florian Lehmann, Hendrik Heuer, and Daniel Buschek. People write for people. When we write, we often write for others, and if we want our writing to be compelling, we tailor not only our content, but also our style to the audience we are writing for. We see that across many different contexts where, for instance, journalists might be tailoring their writing to subscribers of that newspaper, or we as researchers strive to make our papers more compelling by tailoring them to our scientific community we are writing for. And lastly, also authors of novels such as sci-fi books, for instance, need to tailor their writing to the reader group they are writing for. This results in a relationship that forms between the writer and the reader, where the writer aims to tailor their writing to the reader. In fact, there might even be different types of readers that in total make up a whole target reader group that the author needs to think of when aiming for compelling writing. In today's modern writing tools, there is a relationship that forms between human and AI as a result of the co-writing process. Writers may ask the AI counterpart for feedback, text completions, and grammar or spelling correction. However, despite this inherent social nature of writing, existing writing tools do not really bring in the perspective of the target readers. And manually bringing this perspective in during the writing process is challenging, as we may not have access to those people from our target reader group. And even if we would have, we cannot effectively ask others for feedback at all times when we need it during our writing process. And this is why it was our goal to leverage recent advances in AI, like large language models, to not only make feedback from any target group accessible, but also receive feedback on demand at any time during the writing process. This leads us to propose our concept called Writer-Defined AI Personas for On-Demand Feedback Generation. We took inspiration from human-centered design, where it's often beneficial for designers to use personas to engage with a target group that so far just lived in their minds. Writers define personas of their target readers, which can later provide feedback on user-selected portions of the text. What does this look like in detail? Let's say we have a writer currently writing on their artifact. Now, in a first step, writers think about potential target readers that might read their artifact in the future. In a second step, writers now define personas of the target readers by describing them through attributes. Later in the writing process, the writer might want to request feedback from one of the previously defined target reader personas. Our concept now takes the writer-defined persona and its description as input and prompts an LLM to provide feedback on a user-selected portion of the text written in the perspective of this selected persona. We evaluated our work by asking 3 research questions. We wanted to find answers on how writers perceive the idea of personas, how writers define and use such AI personas, and how well contemporary LLMs can support AI personas. We developed a novel text editor interface called Impersona to help find answers to our research questions. This is the first text editor of its kind that takes the writer-reader relationship into account during the writing process. This interface consists of a conventional text editor and a sidebar that employs our concept. There, users can define personas using multiple describing attributes regarding the persona's role and task, its background, or style and content preferences. Writers can then later access their personas in a tab in the sidebar to request feedback on a selected portion of their text. We conducted a user study with 16 participants to evaluate our concept. After getting a brief introduction to our system, writers worked on their own actual writing task for 35 minutes and later elaborated on their experience using our tool in an interview and questionnaire. Our participants were all proficient English speakers. We found that participants valued how AI personas helped them gain feedback from various perspectives. For instance, one participant reported that it is hard to think of the things that were included in the feedback on their own and to look at their text from different angles. We further found that writers often define different types of personas and use them for different roles and goals. Types included, for instance, expert personas, where participants created professors of specific areas, or even mirrored real persons like their PhD advisors. Interestingly, some participants also created mean reviewers that employed strict and critical perspectives. Another finding was that writers had difficulties when initially defining personas, due to finding it hard to visualize potential personas they could create. We further saw that writers iteratively refined their personas based on the received feedback. If the feedback contained properties that they did not want their persona to have, they simply went back and refined their persona. Interestingly, we found that writers generally write iteratively with AI personas and keep them in the loop in their writing process. Sometimes, participants, for instance, requested initial feedback from a persona, incorporated suggested changes, and then requested feedback on their revised paragraph to verify whether they had improved on their paragraph. Additionally, we found that feedback from AI personas had an impact on the text as well as on the writer in some instances. The feedback certainly led writers to change and revise their texts, which they sometimes also kept using beyond the user study. But the feedback also had an impact on writers in some cases. For example, one writer felt pressure to make proposed changes, as they got the impression that their persona should in fact resemble the expert in particular scenarios. Finally, we found that contemporary LLMs can certainly support the concept of AI personas. However, we saw that users came with expectations to LLMs, for instance asking about underlying training data. One participant, for example, expected the underlying LLM to be potentially biased and created multiple personas of different gender and background to alleviate such biases. We further saw that contemporary LLMs often generated long and verbose text, which we found to decrease the quality of generated feedback. Further, participants wished to have extended functionality for more control of the model. For example, tuning the feedback based on properties writers particularly liked in the feedback. In summary, our work spans the following contributions. We proposed the concept of writer-defined AI personas, which lets writers request feedback generated from self-defined personas of their target readers. We further showed results from our user study, which showed that the concept was seen as helpful among writers, inspiring revisions on their text. However, the feedback was seen as too long and sometimes verbose, which shows known limitations of contemporary LLMs. Additionally, we show that AI persona feedback offers enticing benefits such as the direct editor integration of the reader perspective and infinite availability and patience with a struggling writer's repeated feedback requests. Finally, we expand the socio-technical perspective in the design of AI writing tools and call for recognizing the social nature of writing as a starting point for tool design.